Welcome to the virtual office hours. My name is John Fee. I chair the history department here at Messiah College. I have the founding fathers with me, as usual. Megan Piet is behind the camera, as usual. And I just got back from Malibu, California, where I was at the Conference on Faith and History. A lot of good discussion there about the history of American evangelicalism. There was a session on Bebbington's Quadrilateral. If you go back and look at episode 2 of the virtual office hours in this series, you'll see a great graphic that Megan drew up about the, or wrote, what is it, designed about the Bebbington Quadrilateral, but there's a whole session devoted to that. So I'm fired up today about talking about American evangelicalism. I actually put a long post on the blog today if you want to go check that out at www.philipvickersfithian.com. We'll get that across the screen for you. But today we are focused here in episode, I think this is episode 4, on, you can see it on the screen, on Nathan Hatch's book. Now remember, the last episode we introduced Nathan Hatch's book, The Democratization of American Christianity. We finished that book the other day in class, yesterday actually in class. We're now going to be moving on to Christine Hireman's Southern Cross and move into the South, discuss a little bit of gender history and slavery. But a few final thoughts about Hatch's democratization thesis, because I thought we had some good conversation and engagement with that book. One of the later chapters, I believe it's chapter 5, maybe 6 in Hatch's book, and actually Megan led our conversation on that, I think on Monday of this week. He talks about the democratic assault on clerical authority. And I think this is such an important part of the democratization thesis that Hatch is laying out. Clergy, especially in the 18th century, had such a powerful role to play in communities. They had such intellectual and religious and cultural authority. And Hatch shows the ways in which that authority is beginning to erode in the early 19th century. The idea of the educated clergyman in a particular community is going to give way to a much more primitivist, much more common sense, much more democratic understanding of American Christianity. So you have these people like Crazy Lorenzo Dowd and Billy Hibbard, and challenging this long-standing authority that the clergy had. Now, what's fascinating to me, and we talked a little bit about this in class as well, is that a lot of the authority of the clergy, especially those clergy who had intellectual authority in American Christianity and in particular religious communities, was really rooted in their Calvinist theology. I mean, Calvinist theology, always a very kind of intellectual theology. And those democratizers, the Methodists, the Baptists, the Christian movement, African American religion, they're challenging the authority of Calvinism. Now, I don't think I've ever given this illustration before on camera, but I give it all the time in class. And we talked about the distinction between Calvinist means of salvation and an Arminian or free will means of salvation. And of course, it's the free will, the individualistic, kind of theology of salvation that really comes to define the early 19th century in this period of democratization in the early republic. But imagine yourself walking through the woods, through a forest, and you fall into a hole. There's a big pit in the middle of the forest. You fall into it. You're down there at the bottom of the pit. You start screaming, right? Help me, I'm stuck in this pit. I can't get out, right? And then all of a sudden, God hears your call. He comes to the pit. He has a ladder. He takes the ladder, puts it down into the pit. You climb up the ladder, and you're saved. Now, what did you do in the process? Or what did God do? God saved you, right? You were stuck in the pit. What did you do? Well, you cried for help. Your voice was, your voice was able to yell things out. You cried for help. The fall did not affect your vocal cords. Moreover, when the ladder came down, you made a choice. You decided that you were going to indeed climb up the ladder. Technically, you could have said, No thanks, I'm happy down here. I like it down here in this pit. Everything's good. I'm not going to climb up the ladder. Again, this is a more sort of early 19th century Arminian free will understanding of salvation. God is the author of salvation. God saved you, but you had a part to play in it as well. Compare that to the Calvinist view. Same story. You're walking along in a forest. You fall into the pit. But when you fall into that pit, you fall head first. You hit your head on a rock at the bottom of the pit. You're unconscious. You can't cry out for help. God, in his mercy and love, comes with the ladder. He himself climbs down the ladder, puts you over his shoulder, brings you up to the top of the level ground, revives you, and saves you. The only thing you did was you were stupid enough in your sin, dumb enough in your sin, you were so depraved that you fell into the pit and you needed salvation. It is in the early 19th century that the Calvinist view of salvation, that becomes threatened by this more free will democratic understanding where you have a choice, you have power. Democracy is a very individualistic form of religion, which again empowers the individual to make choices about his or her eternal destiny. And I think in this way, the whole intellectual framework, the theological framework, holding the authority of the clergy together, Calvinism, is being attacked and eroded by democracy. Now, the other significant shift, and this is in the later chapters of the book, is Hatch shows how the more radical, individualistic, democratic, uneducated preachers that made up the democratization of American Christianity, by the end of the early Republic, as you're coming up to the Civil War, they've achieved a certain degree of respectability within the religious culture. And this means they have in many ways accommodated themselves to all of those trappings of a traditional, what will become a traditional middle-class life. They start building nice churches, they start making money, they start becoming part of the establishment, they hold political power within their communities. And we had a really interesting discussion then about what respectability in religion, as Baptists and Methodists start building churches and become part of the religious mainstream, as opposed to those out on the fringes who are calling the Congregationalists and the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians, calling them to task for their lack of true evangelical faith. What happens when they reach respectability? And here we had some conversations because I think religion changes, Christianity in America changes, evangelicalism changes, because once they get respectability and power, they begin to accommodate to, say, the world. Now, Charles Finney is a key player in all of this because Hatch calls him a bridge. Charles Finney's very interesting because he still has that sort of democratic feel, that flavor, that free will theology. You know, he rejects the sort of Calvinism of his day, but he's also an educated, sort of middle-class preacher. He's a former lawyer, and he's very able to connect the democratic impulses of, say, the 1790s, 18 teens with the more respectable middle-class people. So I like how Hatch treats Finney as having one foot in the democratization of American Christianity and another foot in the kind of respectable middle-class Protestantism that emerges out of the Second Great Awakening. So there's some themes from Hatch. These are the ones we focused on largely in class. It's a great book, and I think it's really setting the stage for our future readings at Hireman and Marsden, and even later on with Molly Worthen's book. So we're moving forward. Thanks for watching, and see you next time on the Virtual Office Hours.